I think a key question that many people have on their minds is, can people really change? When we're with our partner for so long, it feels a lot like this is just how they are, this is just how I am, and it will always be this way. So often we just feel completely stuck. However, I wanted to explore this topic of change. What does it mean to actually change? Why do we change? Why do we not change? And for couples in a long-term relationship, how do we actually create the change we want to see in our relationship? So I invited Dr. Kathryn Ford to come and talk with us about the topic of change. Now, Dr. Ford has been one of the San Francisco Bay Area's most sought-after couples therapists for more than 20 years. Her work integrates her traditional training, meditation practice, and the latest neuroscientific research. After receiving her MD degree from Brown Medical School, Dr. Ford completed a residency in psychiatry at Stanford University School of Medicine. Dr. Ford has also served as a consultant and director for group relations conferences in the Tavistock model, and she continues her work with organizations and corporations as a consultant with Upstart Logic. She has taught in a variety of settings, including Stanford Continuing Studies, Stanford School of Medicine, Santa Clara University, and the Institute for Transpersonal Psychology, which is now called Sophia University. Dr. Ford is a regular contributor to Psychology Today, Mind Body Green, and other online publications. Originally from Texas, she and her husband, psychiatrist and organizational consultant Dr. Peter Finkelstein, now split their time between the San Francisco Bay Area and Rhode Island. Her book is called The Aperture Effect, a radically simple approach to finding joy and connection in your relationship. And in this week's episode, she's going to give us some of the tools that she shares in her book. This interview was such a pleasure for me. I love all the people I've interviewed on this podcast, but Dr. Ford has a special place in my heart, largely because it's so nice speaking to such a well-trained couples therapist and to discuss some difficult topics around change, around what do we want from our relationship and what are we willing to give or sacrifice to get it. I hope you enjoy this episode as much as I enjoyed it. So go grab yourself a warm drink and let's dive in. Welcome to Relationship Reset, Reignite, Reconnect, Rebuild, the podcast for high-achieving couples who want to transform their relationship from surviving to thriving. I'm Katie Russler, a relationship coach and counselor with over 15 years of experience helping busy, overwhelmed couples rebuild connection, trust, and intimacy. If you've been together for years and feel stuck on autopilot, disconnected and frustrated by constant miscommunication, you're in the right place. Each week, we'll explore practical tools, relatable stories, and strategies to help you reignite the spark, rebuild your bond, and create the relationship you've always dreamed of. Because no matter how long you've been together, it's never too late to hit reset. Let's dive in. Welcome back to the podcast. When I work with high-achieving couples who are looking to rebuild their relationship for whatever reason, there is the question that comes on everyone's mind. Well, can my partner really change? And sometimes, can I really change? So I have brought on Dr. Kathryn Ford, and we're going to be discussing, can people really change? What does change mean? And what does it actually look like? So Dr. Kathryn Ford, thank you so much for being here on the podcast.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me, Katie. I really like your podcast, and it fits in very well with the kind of work I do, so I'm happy to be here.
Yes, I'm excited about the work you do as well, because as a fellow relationship counselor, I always love how we all take different approaches, but they really come back to building the connection for couples again. Share with us a little bit about yourself, your background, and I know you work on 2 different coasts in the States. Walk us through a little bit of that too.
Sure. My background is I was trained as a psychiatrist, and so I had a thoroughgoing training in traditional Western psychology, psychotherapy, all of that. But also, I went to Stanford for my residency, my psychiatry residency, which meant that I was right in the middle of a wealth of really great teachers of meditation, yoga, mindfulness. And I very quickly got interested in that and started spending a lot of time on cushions and mats. And so my work is very heavily influenced. In fact, I think that became the main new thing I was introducing as I worked with couples was the importance of being able to be really present in the here and now. The other thread in my work is the neuroscience, because also at about that time, the world of neuroscience was just expanding incredibly with all kinds of new work. There were new tools that the neuroscientists could use, and it was extremely exciting to see what that had to offer to couples in terms of changing.
Well, let's dive into this topic of can people really change? And I think it's best we start with kind of, in a sense, I know this sounds silly, but a definition of change. Like, what does that actually mean? Would you be willing to start us there?
Right, right. That is an interesting starting place. Probably where I would start with what changes. One of the many things that I say when people say, can people actually change? It's kind of a funny question if you think about it, because very few people that are asking that question don't think that they're learning. In other words, we're constantly learning, whether it's learning to drive a different car than we've driven before, or learning a new recipe, or learning a new career. We're constantly learning. And that's really what change is. If you look at the neurological substrate of change, one of the big discoveries in this last couple of decades of neuroscience is that the neuroplasticity of the brain, which means the ability of the brain to change, continues throughout our lifetime. Before that, the brain we thought we had was a brain that had neuroplasticity age 0 to 5. And we thought everything gets laid down before you're 5 years old. And then there's a little bit of reworking around adolescence. And then you've got what you've got. In fact, you've got what you've got, plus you're going to start to lose it now. That was really depressing and not a very good idea about change. But it turns out that really what we've got is a brain that's constantly remaking itself. Everything from assigning certain brain areas that used to do function A, now they're doing function B, to the micro neural connections that form as we learn. Our brain is constantly changing. And so can we change? Absolutely. In fact, we're not capable of not changing. What is true is that the brain has both stability and change going on. If you think about it, you wouldn't want a brain that's constantly remaking itself every time you encounter something. So there's this balance of keeping enough stable that you can function and that you have a set of skills and abilities and knowledge, and enough change going on that you can constantly incorporate the new. So we're really good at changing. That's the first answer to can we change? Absolutely. We're built that way.
I love that you led with this because this is why I wanted to ask, like, how are we defining change? When people say this, I believe like in session or to their friend, I don't think he's going to be able to change. What they're looking for is particular habits to break and switch, and almost a 180 in certain personality characteristics that rub them the wrong way, right? That annoy them. So when we approach the topic of can people really change? It's exactly what you said. When we look at the science, yes. Do they want to change? Is there a reason to change? And is the change of value overall to the system? That's really the issue, right?
Yeah, and I would say the reason people pose that question, and by the way, that is one of the questions when people come to a couples therapist, by that time, that question's very much on their mind because they've already been trying for certain things and they're feeling like it might be impossible. What I tell people is you might be doing the wrong experiment. The wrong experiment is when you're getting in your partner's way of change and you don't know it. Change with a couple, one of the reasons I switched from working with individuals to couples 20 plus years ago is that I realized that I was having 1 hour a week with somebody to help them change things in their lives that they didn't like. And they were going home to a partner who was having way more influence than that, usually in the direction of keeping things the same. So the two keys to changing are, and the other thing that I mean when I say do the right experiment is sometimes because we're so afraid that we're not going to get what we want, not everybody, but sometimes we need somebody to prove to us that they love us, that they will try hard, that they can do these things. And we kind of sit back, like with our arms crossed, like, okay, go ahead, show me. That, under those conditions, they won't be able to change. The changes will start to happen when you figure out that you are a change partnership, that change is teamwork. And when you figure out that every change you want from your partner involves you in some way. Now, you don't know, usually at the beginning, in what way it needs to involve you, but it does. And so when you learn to look at changes you want from the point of view of how can we team up to get this shift that we want, that's a whole different ballgame.
I love the framework of the experiment, right? That's a lot of what relationship work is. Not being as a therapist, but in a relationship, the work you're doing is experimental. Trial and error. Did that work? Did that not work? And so to see change as teamwork, that reprograms, rewrites, breaks the conditioning around he, she, they need to prove it to me.
Right.
They need to make the change. And as you were saying that, I even thought often it's a reflection of, do we believe that we can even change? Let me see you do it because honestly, I don't know if I can do it. I'd rather just sit back
Right.
and watch you do it.
Right. And you're right. That question isn't just being asked about the partner, it's also being asked about themselves. And absolutely, the real question is under what conditions do people change? And one of the main things I put in the book was a lot of description about the conditions that tend to work against change and the conditions that tend to work for change. And we can go into more of that as you like.
Yeah, I think that's a great starting point into that discussion. So, first, introduce your book to us. And then,
Oh,
because I
okay.
know really, in a sense, the method and how you work with couples is really the book and how you've really come across the way you address things with couples, how you talk about these topics. So, let's start there. And then I'd love to talk about what are the things that are going to work against the change.
The title of the book is The Aperture Effect. And I wrote the book because I thought that I was discovering some really powerful ways for couples to work with each other for what they wanted. And at a certain point, I started to feel like I wanted to share that more widely than I could do just seeing one couple at a time in my office. So I wanted to make this more widely available. If I've succeeded, this book is kind of a do it yourself couples therapy. It's very heavily laced with exercises. I really believe that we learn from doing. So I've got a lot of explanations in there and a lot of stuff that tells you why you're going to do certain things. I think of the heart of the book as these are exercises. They're going to ask you to change usually one thing while you're talking to each other. The one thing is going to be something that will help you talk to each other better. But more importantly, the exercise is about changing your ability to pay attention to certain things. My work is very much based on mindful in the moment awareness. One of my very strong convictions is that the reason couples miss out on being able to talk to each other in ways that get them where they want to go is that, especially when there's difficulty, we're constantly up in our heads trying to solve problems. Couple gets in trouble and instantly they're thinking, what does this have to do with my attachment style? What does this have to do with my love language? What does this have to do with my conversational style? All of those are maps and they're really, really important and very valuable. And I've learned a ton from them. However, when you're talking to another human being, it's very important that you not be looking at the map, that you be paying attention to what's going on right now between me and you. In particular, how open are we to each other? Because everything flows from openness. All the understanding, caring that I want as I'm talking to my partner, that's all based on are they open and am I open? And it doesn't matter what I say. If they're closed to me, it's not going anywhere. So I really teach people to be very aware in the moment of how open are you, but starting with yourself, how open are you? And then how open is your partner? And to really prioritize that. And so my word for openness is aperture. The aperture effect doesn't mean get what you want by being open all the time. It means pay attention to whether or not you're open in order to adjust things so that your conversations get you where you want to go, which is more connection with less effort and less pain. And it's an analogy that works for some people. It's a little bit like driving a car. When you're driving a car, you don't want to be looking at the road map. You want to have your eyes on the road ahead of you. Because if the road is wide open and sunny and dry and no curves, you're going to drive very differently than if you see bumps in the road or curves in the road or rain slick on the road. And conversation is like that. You need to be able to adjust just like you would as a driver according to how open you feel you are and the other person is. And that's the essential thing about the aperture effect. That's the aperture effect.
What's really important about what you said is just often we go into a discussion, and once it gets difficult, we are sort of in our emotional brain. But in that process, we're not being aware of, is this energetically even worth it right now? Like maybe we need that pause. Maybe we need to just say, hey, I always say, get out a piece of paper and pen and really write what's the problem exactly? Like what is this about?
What are we talking about?
Exactly, to get back a little more into the logic mind, but because we waste so much energy, and that is a judgment word to say that we waste it, but often a lot of energy is expelled and it doesn't lead to anything. So I love that your book gives, hey, here's a tweak. Here's one simple change in this exercise. This is why you're doing it. And then it's going to lead to XYZ, right? And it really allows them to have more of the outcomes that so many couples say when, like, we have communication issues. It's about arguing usually, whether they're not arguing because somebody's not talking or they're arguing at a level that's uncomfortable to them. So tell us about some of the things that makes it difficult to change then when it's not a teamwork kind of thing. What are you noticing?
What gets in the way of change? Well, the first thing that gets in the way is thinking that people are a certain way and that's the way they are. When I talk to people about openness, the first thing they think I mean is how open are you as a person? As if that was one static thing, as if that's a trait. I'm talking about things that change moment to moment, just like everything else in life does. The biggest thing that gets in the way of change is people getting stuck with ideas about who they are, who their partner is, putting a lot of labels on each other and then kind of reinforcing them by saying, well, I know you're not going to do that because you're not that neat, right? So forget about getting help in the kitchen because you're such a messy person anyway. Well, maybe they are messier than you are. And that doesn't address all the other reasons that they might be willing to help you in the kitchen and that it might work out to be a very good thing for both of you. So first start with the fact that we label ourselves and each other and kind of, rigidify who we are and who the other person is. The other thing that gets in the way of change is simply not understanding that most of the things that we want change with are a process. And people think that because they ask for a change, like start showing up in the kitchen to help me with the dishes after dinner. And then the very next night, the other person does not show up in the kitchen to help them with the dishes. And they're like, see, I knew it wouldn't work. Changes, and especially the big ones, take a certain time. Sometimes I work with couples for a few weeks on a major change. Let's say he's a very bad listener. And in fact, he's kind of dismissive when she tries to talk. And I'm working with them on that. And after a few weeks, they'll come in and they'll say, this just isn't working. We're not getting anywhere. And I'll say, well, tell me what you mean by that. Well, last night, we sat down and for about the first 10 minutes, he was really listening very well. And in fact, he was repeating stuff back to me and I could tell he really got it. And then he got distracted and he pulled out his phone. And you see what I mean? It's just never going to work. He's not capable of it. And what I usually say at that point is, well, the perspective I have that you might not is I've watched a lot of people go through changing these things like this. If you were succeeding, it would look exactly like that. In other words, it takes a while to get to the change you want. The biggest mistake people make and the biggest reason people don't change is they don't understand that. And so when they see a tiny little bit of change, like a little green shoot coming up out of the ground, they squash it because they think, well, that's not what I really want. Are you kidding me? That little thing, that's not what I wanted. I wanted this bigger, grander thing. And they fail to understand that this bigger, grander thing might be possible if they nurtured that little sprout, just like you do with the plant. Mighty oaks grow from tiny little sprouts. That's the way people change. One other thing I'd say about that that's awfully important is often people come to therapists or they tune into your podcast or whatever when they really are in what I would call a downward spiral. Things have gotten worse and worse instead of getting bad and then getting good and then getting bad. They've started to spiral downward. And there are certain traits and characteristics of a downward spiral that are very different than an upward spiral in a couple. And the important thing to know about downward spirals is you can reverse that and get back to a good part of your relationship. But 80% of the effort that you're going to exert, each of you, for that change process is going to have to happen right away for the very first 2% of the change. And that's why people get discouraged. They're huffing and they're puffing and they're trying so hard and they look over and they see this little bitty sprout of change and they go, all of that work just for that? And then they extrapolate and they think, this is a linear curve. And from now on, I'm going to have to work this hard to get every little piece of this particular change. And that's actually not true at all. In physics, we learned that objects in motion tend to maintain the direction of their motion, right? And that you have to put a great deal of energy into a physical system to get the direction to change. But once you do, the object in motion tends to maintain its directionality. It's the same thing with the downward spiral of couples. Once you turn that corner towards starting up instead of going down, things get a lot easier, but it's very hard to turn the corner. And you have to kind of know some of these things so that you don't quit prematurely, so that you don't discourage each other by stomping on the little shoot.
Oh, you just spoke to my physics heart with the potential energy to kinetic energy. I was like, oh my God, yes, you're so right. So to bring that back, the three things really you drew light upon was we've got to remove the labels on ourselves and on our partners of what they're capable or what we're capable of. Even if it's characteristics or personality traits that we feel like have always, in quotations, been there, because that's a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's just going to ruin it every time. The second is that success looks different than what we want it to and that we believe it should, but that the moment that we start to get more patient and we allow for the time, we start to see it for what it really is and we see the growth because we're not waiting for, as you saw, like the big bang of change, the 180. We know it's kind of the 2%. I always say 2% every day. 2% every day. And then the third thing was that physics piece that the hardest work is in the beginning. To go from standing to moving takes way more force than we realize, right? And it's the same for habit changes. To put intention behind what we do, what we say, what we don't do, what we don't say is heavy until that momentum happens. And we start to see that progress. As you shared, that couple, 10 minutes of listening to me. Holy cow. Like I was like, yeah, there you go. Celebrate that. I would have just stopped and been like, this is amazing. I know you're looking at your phone right now, but that was epic. Like, thank you.
Right. Exactly. And that's what we need to do. We need to learn that as soon as we see anything that's going in the direction we wanted and we ask for, we need to applaud that big time. Like, go out and celebrate. Because that is the big deal right there. And of course, at that point, your partner doesn't need to be reminded of all the times they did it wrong or the fact they took their phone out anyway. What they need to do is to be encouraged. We really need to get better at managing the morale in our couple. Everything that we want depends on morale and depends on having a positive cycle of reinforcement. And if we can do that, basically that's the right experiment. You need to offer your partner the ideal conditions for this change. Ideal conditions for this change. The right experiment is to find out what can they do if I offer them the right conditions for the change that I want. That's what you want to know. You don't want to know what they can do if I sit back and wait for them to do it by themselves. That's not a very good experiment.
Yeah, definitely. And I think there's such value to praising our partner and not just like, good job, thank you, that's it. But to say, I felt so listened to in those 10 minutes. I feel so valued and seen because that's going to speak to the heart and mind of our partner versus, yeah, I really appreciated that. Like, that's a step forward, but we want to get into the root of what we want, which is to feel respected, to feel seen, valued. Use those words and our partner has the roadmap, right? Like, ooh, okay, she felt seen. He felt respected. I want to keep going for that. It's like the breadcrumbs get bigger and bigger and bigger as we do that.
Yes, exactly. One of the sort of funny but sort of tragic things that couples often do to each other is at the point that you're now going to really try and turn the corner, both of you are pretty discouraged. And I've heard so often a partner, they're trying to do this thing I told them of positive comments, but I've so often heard them do the following. Let's say he listened for 10 minutes and she'll say, that was great. I felt so listened to. You finally listened to me, not like all those other times. What we don't realize is both of those brains are listening to the reminder of all the terrible times that evokes all kinds of things in both of those brains that are discouraging and that do not help them succeed. So, just think not to say, and by the way, it was really hard all the times you didn't do that. He doesn't need to know that. She doesn't need to know that. Just go with, wow, this was great.
Yes, absolutely. I want to speak to the experience you touched on that with change, there are going to be setbacks, right? There's going to be like some progress and then the old habit will emerge because that's actually normal and that's part of the success trail. Yeah. How can couples, one, be more prepared for it and two, handle it better? Because I find exactly what you said, they kind of end up falling further back than they would have had they had the tools for that phase of the change process.
Are you talking about a major phase where they really slide backwards? Or are you talking about these tinier little moments where they did it the new way twice and then they did it the old way once and they did it? Which one should I speak to?
Yeah, good question, because I think to them, the little ones feel big. So let's do the little ones.
Okay, okay. The little ones, again, are part of the change process. I often talk to people about there's an arc of change that's kind of interesting, and it goes like this. Years ago, a psychologist described this arc that I'm going to describe. This isn't mine, but I borrowed it. We start out with something that I would say is unconscious and incompetent. That's the behavior that your partner does that you don't like that makes things worse, but they are not aware of it. So the first phase of a change process as a couple is the person that is aware of it and wants the change has to bring that information to the partner. It is not going to be fun. It is going to be really hard. In fact, the partner usually is going to say, "What do you mean? I listen to you. What do you mean? What are you talking about? I always do the dishes, right?" So there's going to be a lot of repetitions of, "No, I actually do think there's something here. Please talk to me about it," etc. It's a very hard part of the change process. That's phase one. Phase two is your partner finally says, "I've been noticing, I think you might be right, or at least partially right. I think you might be onto something that I do take out my phone a lot, and probably that's part of what you're talking about." Then so now it's a conscious incompetency. The trick here is that the partner that wants the change and supporting the change has to go from behavior number one, which is making sure that their partner hears them about what they want, to behavior number two, which is don't talk about the old stuff anymore. The only thing you pay attention to is successful efforts to get competent behavior. So you're going completely for what some psychologists would call positive reinforcement. And all these slipbacks, like the time they forgot to do it or the time they took out their phone and didn't even notice, you don't say anything. Because now you're in phase two. They kind of have acknowledged that they kind of know what the deal is, but it's going to take them a while to change a habit, a pattern. And what you're going to do during that phase two is every time they get it right, say, "Wow, thanks a lot." And every time they get it wrong, as if you didn't hear it or see it. That is the deal with that. And then, of course, the final phase of this change process is you get the change you want. You now have conscious competency. And then the third phase is effortless, which is that all of that falls back into unconscious because we only have so much that we can be conscious of at any one time. So we don't keep our eye on every single thing all the time. We keep our eye on the things that actually need our attention. Once that thing doesn't need our attention anymore, then it can fall back into kind of the background, if you will. That is the process. And so it's a very important, what I mean by teamwork is one of the really important pieces of teamwork is for what I call the supporting partner to know about this change. It goes from confrontation, which is very uncomfortable for both people, to support of change efforts, however small, however unsteady, you just always go there when they get it right.
Yeah, that holds both partners accountable to the shifts that they want to see. And it's really good that you pointed out that sort of that phase two of I can kind of notice. It doesn't mean that they take full ownership and go, "Yes, my dear, you're right. You've been right the whole time."
Right.
So, it's about being effective, not right. So when you get the buy-in of, I see a piece, a glimpse of this, I start to make some shifts, as you said, essential to then get out of that mindset of, well, let me keep pointing. You did it again, versus, yes, thank you. I feel seen in this moment. I'm really grateful for you taking a moment.
Right.
Like you said, not finally, but just taking a moment and being able to praise that, because seeing that, and we're all goal-driven people on this podcast, knowing that the goal can happen, that we can obtain it. If we hold that to be true, then we will get there. And we know we can't then turn around and walk backwards. It's not as effective. You're like, which way am I going? So you do have to keep going. No, I see the behaviors I want and that make me feel loved or whatever. And I want to keep going towards those. And if it goes back to what you feel like is phase one, which it really can't, because your partner now is aware.
Right. You
then
go back to phase one.
Exactly. If it feels like that to such a degree, that is even more so when, your book, you step into talking with somebody, a coach, a therapist, a psychologist, to say, hey, I think maybe an outside person saying these things or pointing out how are one of those three things happening that is kind of impacting the change and blocking it, that I or we are not noticing, is really important.
Right. Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the outside person helping because, of course, I mean, it's ubiquitously true that we've heard so many times, well, I told him that 50 times, and now he's listening to you tell him, and he says, you're right. What is that? It's just the fact of it that we have such a very different dynamic with our partner that sometimes we don't fully listen to them in the same way that we might to a couples therapist, for instance. And sometimes we do need that other person to help us observe, to help us change, etc.
I always tell my client who has that response, thank you for planting the seeds so that they
Yeah,
could finally listen to what I'm going to say or their friend or their mother or whomever, right? It's always planting seeds.
right.
It will eventually, a plant, like you said, will grow. Just don't stomp on it once it does.
Stomp on it. Yes, right.
With this thought of change and really with your book, you and I both tend to work with high achieving couples. What would you say is the biggest block that these types of couples run into when it comes to their ego and stubbornness around the concept and the idea of change, who should change, what should change, how should it
Right.
change, kind of thing?
Right. One of the most powerful things I do with couples in my consultation room, but especially when I teach workshops for couples, usually through Stanford Continuing Ed. And at first, I really wanted to teach a workshop for couples, and I was really afraid of it because I thought people are going to feel so exposed to sit in a room with other couples, even just the fact that we're here to talk about our couple. And I constructed the workshop so they wouldn't have to share any personal material in the group. It was just a group to talk about what the exercises were like when they went out of the room and did the exercises. Well, to my amazement, when they turned in their evaluations at the end of the course, almost always every course, there were a lot of comments about what I liked the best about this course was getting to talk to other couples about what couples life is like. One of the biggest things that gets in our way is we don't know what's kind of usual and customary and what is particular to our couple. We are so private and secretive about our couple's life. As some say, it's like a magic show. All the good stuff is behind a curtain. And you don't get to see other couples succeeding and failing and what they're trying and what's working. And so it's very important to kind of normalize some of these things like, yeah, some of these things is just the way couples life goes. So for these high achievers, sometimes it can feel like we must be doing something wrong. Either there's something wrong with me or there's something wrong with you, or there's something wrong with us, and probably there's something wrong with you. And when they can realize, no, it's not that you are a particularly troubled couple. It's just couples' life is really complicated and difficult. That's the way it is. And sometimes you can invoke a little bit of just the ordinariness of that. That, of course, when you get into a discussion about something important that you have differences around, that is not going to turn out to be comfortable just because you had 12 couple sessions. It's going to be uncomfortable. Even after you're really skillful at it, it's going to be uncomfortable. And that there are certain responses we have as human beings of discomfort when we're in contact with other human beings, especially about difficult things or controversial things. It's just going to be uncomfortable, difficult, hard to find our way. And sometimes you can help people towards a little bit of humility. Like, this is just another thing you need to learn. Like, you learn to drive a car, you learn to teach your classes, you learn to, how to participate in the PTA at school. This is just the next thing that you need to learn. And part of why being a couple is so hard, I think, is that I think we are meant to continue to grow and develop as adults throughout our lives. And I think the main place we do that is in our important relationships, like with our partner. And I think there's a whole lot of learning that we have to do there. And it is hard work. It's really hard work. And the payoff is really good if you figure out how to get yourself to do it.
Yes, 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 yes. I think more of us need to be saying it's hard work and here's what the work is because we've all heard it from our family. Oh yeah, marriage is hard work. Relationships are hard work. Yeah, but what's the work?
Right. What does that
mean?
Right. And too often we think it means to put up with something is hard work or to be patient with the other person's bad habits is hard work. And it is. And some of that's important. But for too long, I think in psychology, we were told that the key to relationship is to accept your partner as they are. One time, a friend of mine who was having trouble in her marriage said that to me. She said, I've tried so hard to accept him just as he is. And I said, well, why did you think that was going to be enough? And she looked at me like, what are you talking about? Because those were in the days where that was supposed to be the whole tamale. And it really isn't. It's really important to accept who they are. And part of who they are is a person that can learn and change. And both are true. And acceptance and change are not two different things or two opposite things. They work together. And in fact, to get change, you need to be very accepting of this is where we are today. And let's figure out what we would need to do if we want to be over here tomorrow. And that all of that is true.
Yes. And I would even add us discovering our own identity in the context of a relationship because we shift and change and being able to explore who am I like this or why do I do these things, but I don't do it in other areas of my life. That's hard work too, because that's inner consciousness of yourself. Like I need to pay attention to me, not them, not what they're doing.
Yes, exactly. And in fact, that's the place where people tend to say that thing about, well, I don't know what you're talking about. I'm not like this with anybody else, as if it's your partner's fault in some way. You're like, I'm blaming you for the fact that I just screwed up because I don't screw up with other people in this way. Yeah, duh. No other relationship is ever going to be like this one. And that's a hard thing to realize.
Yes, definitely. Well,
and I was going to add on, part of that is what you just said, that it confronts you so well with who you are, and it confronts you so well with the things that you actually might want to change about yourself, but you can't yet. So, you've given this other person a front row seat to who you are, and that makes it kind of impossible for you to avoid yourself anymore. And that is part of what's very hard.
Yes, definitely. I don't know if you use the same terminology, but I always call it with my clients is the mirror effect. So one example would be your partner's always on their phone. You feel like they don't give you attention. I often say, where do you feel like you're escaping in your own life? Where do you feel like you're not giving yourself attention? Because we see it so clearly in our partner, what they're doing. They're not respecting me. Okay, share with me how you show respect to yourself. Show me, teach me what you're doing. And then they'll be like, well, I stay up late. I don't do things to take care of myself. I'm like, I get that they need to respect you, but wouldn't it be nice for you to do that for yourself so you can stand even more firm in, hey, I deserve respect.
I love that. I mean, that is sometimes why we get so angry at the other person for not giving us what we want, is because we're expecting all of it to come from them. And we're kind of blind to the fact that actually a lot of that is supposed to come from us to us. And if we're neglecting ourselves, that's really, I love what you just said about that.
Yeah, the self-responsibility piece. Yeah. To wrap us up, share a little bit more about your book, because I know this is going to, like my listeners, this is the type of book they're going to want to grab onto and start to practice the lessons that you teach in it.
The Aperture Effect is organized into 4 main categories that I consider sort of the pillars of couples' life. The first one being aperture, meaning your openness and your ability to pay attention to openness, the Aperture Effect. The second one is dialogue. And dialogue in my world means a conversation that's very different than the conversations we usually have that are debates. It means a conversation where you're actually there to learn something and you're collaborating so that both of you can learn something. And you're prioritizing the effect on the relationship. So 2 is dialogue. Third part is mindfulness. All of this is based on mindfulness. Everything I'm talking about is an in-the-moment phenomenon. It's not something you plan out and execute tomorrow. This is something that you do little bit by little bit in each moment of contact. And the final part is about learning and how to be learning partners in some of the ways that we talked about today. The thing that I think is really important about the book is a learn by doing book. Each chapter is organized into, there are descriptions of the theory. This is why this is important, or this is what we know about the research about this. And then there's lots of exercises, really small, and they are not, most couples books, the exercises are either thought experiments, like think about how often you do the dishes or something, or they are talk to your partner about how often they do the dishes. For the exercises in my book, you're going to use the topics that you're already talking about. So these are experiments with talking about that topic or that set of topics in a different way so that you can observe, well, what changes? The topic is the same. What is different about this conversation that we just had where we, for example, my favorite experiment I say experiment, they're called exercises, but they really are experiments. My favorite one is a slowing down exercise. And always I find that couples get the most out of that Why? Because if you slow a conversation down enough, you have time to learn from it. You have time to pay attention to, am I really open right now? Does it feel like you're really open to me? The rate at which we conduct most of our conversations, we can't even really very well process the content, much less know if we're open or not. So things like that are in the exercises. And it's scattered in a lot also with very brief little stories and vignettes from people I've worked with. I don't like long vignettes because I think they're a little boring, but there are these little snippets where I kind of demonstrate something by saying, and then she said, and he said, and this is where it went. So there's a lot of that kind of material in there also.
I love when people share those types of stories because you often see yourself and your own situation or your parents' situation or your sister's. You're like, oh, I've seen that. And it just gives it a greater context. So I think
Right.
it's wonderful that you added that to it. I always love to wrap up my interviews with, do you have a particular homework item that those who've listened today can walk away from this from? I mean, you've given us some, we could just pull from what you've already said, but maybe there's one in particular on the topic of, can people really change, that you would say, you know what, this week after listening to this, I want you to try this one thing.
Here's the one thing. It's a combo of two things. First of all, develop a very strong habit yourself of commenting positively on all those things that your partner does that are helpful, that you like. The little stuff like, thanks a lot for parking my car. I didn't have time to do that when I got home. Or thanks for going for the groceries. Sometimes when I tell couples to make positive comments about this, they say, well, that's just table stakes. There is no such thing as table stakes when it comes to couples life. It's all important. None of us are entitled to have a partner. Let me just say, none of us are entitled to have a partner that cooked our dinner. So you got your dinner cooked. A big thanks a lot. I love that you came home in time to cook dinner. That was so great. So thing one is build a positive atmosphere where your partner is expecting to hear the good stuff from you, not just the bad. Thing two is when you do need to talk about something that's causing a problem, don't spring it on them. Arrange a scheduled, I call it a volitional conversation where you say, look, you know that thing that happened the other day where I wanted you to do the dishes and you got mad at me? We need to talk about that. When would be a good time for you?
Yeah.
Instead of, I can't believe you got mad at me when, none of that. You want to create an atmosphere that feels safe from negativity. And if you do that, then when you have to have this hard conversation where you are going to be uncomfortable with each other, it's a lot easier. There's a little bit more trust, a little bit more confidence that it's not all negative, that your partner actually does notice the positive things. So build a positive atmosphere. And then when you need to talk about something important about the relationship, which will be often, schedule it.
And I love that you didn't say, we need to have a conversation when's good for you, because that leads like, but
I know.
that thing happened. Can we talk about that? When is good? Oh, I'm so glad you pointed that out. I think, especially as women, we like to be quite dramatic, don't we? Like, we need to talk, and every day it's like,
somebody said those are the scariest 4 words in the human language. We have to talk.
Yes. So really creating gratitude and acknowledgement, being able to comment positively on the things that you like, the progress you're seeing, so that you also train your brain to see that. And then to be able to have those conversations productively by giving them the respect of asking them when's the time right for them, and also allowing them to have an idea of what the topic will be so that they know, oh, this will be more than a 15-minute conversation. I'm going to need longer. So that is excellent homework. Please, listener, go buy the book. Go do this homework this week, this month. I think this is going to be so supportive for so many of you as you really start to figure out how to rebuild your relationship in this, next season of life. Dr. Ford, this has been wonderful speaking with you. I thank you so much for sharing your wisdom, giving us some real practical ways to address it rather than just theoretical. Often it gets really up in our head, but you're like, no, let's create the change, because it can happen. You've answered the question. Can people really change? Absolutely.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Katie.
And dear listener, we'll see you next week. Thanks for tuning in to Relationship Reset. If you found this episode helpful, share it with a friend who might need it too. Don't forget to rate and review the podcast. It helps more couples discover these tools to rebuild their connection too. And be sure to hit subscribe so you don't miss next week's episode. It's gonna be a good one. Your relationship is worth the work, and the rewards, totally worth the effort. See you next week.